Bonjour, said Marianne. Bonjour, said Dominique. The two stood there, in the glossy lobby, in Central Station, in Montreal, in Quebec, in this Europe away from Europe, and maybe still a little in love. Or at least just one of them was. Or maybe both of them. Marianne had wished it were both of them, but she had hoped not. Marianne and Dominique faced each other, but their eyes drifted awkwardly left and right, making uncomfortable contact with each other only once or twice. As Marianne's eye glanced at a little girl with a yellow cap sitting on her father's shoulders, Dominique asked her if she wanted to grab a coffee before he boarded his train. She nodded her head with forced enthusiasm, lifting her eyebrows and pulling back the ends of her lips into a smile. The 20-something Quebecois walked to a coffee shop in the station. They ordered their drinks and sat down, resting their coffees, Dominique's drink being black and Marianne's being light with whipped cream on top, on the table. Dominique said it was just like old times, and Marianne nodded in confirmation. She remembered the old times. Of course she did. She remembered their coffee sit-downs. They had talked over coffee. They had laughed over coffee. And, a few times, they had cried over coffee. Those few times stuck out the most for Marianne. The crying times. Those were the times that solidified their bond, more than the laughing, more than the kissing, more than the quickies on her bed. It was in a coffee house that they had ended it, after she had learned of the cheating. Marianne sipped her coffee through a straw. The question of why Dominique had invited her here, just to see him off on a train 11 months after their relationship's end, kept going off in her mind like a vibrating phone. She wanted to ask him as they sat there wordlessly sipping caffeine, but instead she only asked him where he was going. He said New York. She asked what for. He said a job, in the city, with sound design for a TV show. She congratulated him, and remarked that was just what he had wanted. He thanked her, and said he knew. She asked how proficient his English was. He said his English was proficient enough. She said that was good, and, after a pause, asked him why he had asked her here to this train station almost a year after he had stomped on her heart, just so she could see him ride off on a train to New York. Dominique had not expected this inquiry to be so blunt, and so he was hesitant in answering and sat there opposite her at the table, silent. Marianne looked at Dominique's eyes, behind his shaggy brown hair, and saw that he was trying to figure out a different answer from the one he had already prepared. While Dominique tried hard to turn the gears in his head, Marianne's gaze lowered to the hair on his face. The stubble. Marianne remembered when she in the beginning had found that stubble so defining, so masculine, so belonging to Dominique and therefore belonging to her. Now that stubble only disgusted Marianne. Instead of sexy or ragged, the short hair on his cheeks and chin only appeared dirty. Dirt on the face of a dirty man. Of course, Marianne knew he wasn't dirty, or at least no more dirty than the average man. But still that brown, dirt-like stubble sat there like grime on his face, making her feel revolted, when what she truly held was fear. Fear of hurt, in her heart. Finally, Dominique's eyes faced straight at Marianne's, and he said to her that he knew he had broken her heart, that he knew it all too well. He said, poetically, that before starting his new life in New York he wanted to end his old life with reconciliation, with redemption. Marianne wanted to forgive him. A visual fantasy flashed through her mind of kissing him, her rekindled love, before he boarded the train, a steam engine, and set off to a distant foreign land. It played in her mind for 3, perhaps 5 seconds. But she could not forgive him. She could not be so weak. Marianne sat there in consideration to his words, and soon came to the conclusion that his attempt to achieve reconciliation for manipulating her was in itself a manipulation. Her thoughts asked if this was the only reason she was there, if it was just to make him feel better about his own selfish mistakes. It then shook about in her that there were no mistakes. Dominique had known exactly what he was doing. He had known what he was doing, and now he wanted to feel better about it, but asking pardon-moi to her on a train station coffee shop didn't make her feel better about it. Not at all. But Marianne did not voice any of this to Dominique. She only paused for a minute, smiled a smile of false comfort more for herself than for him, and told him that he was very considerate. The two Quebecois sat, drank coffee, and tried unsuccessfully to re-spark conversation. When the track for Dominique's train was announced, he asked Marianne if she would accompany him to the platform. She told him she would. Having finished their coffees 5 minutes ago, they left the shop and walked side by side to track 9. They kept side by side only with peripheral vision, and never looked directly at each other. As they walked, Marianne thought about the words she would use to part on when Dominique would board his train. She wondered if she should stick with the animosity she had already established, Or if she should tell him that he was a bastard and that she refused to forgive him. Or if she should tell him that he wanted to forgive him because she loved him, despite his being a bastard. Or if she should tell the bastard that she just forgave him and nothing more. Marianne wondered, if she told him she accepted his apology, how she would feel about herself when she returned to her apartment. She wondered if, in forgiving him, she could forgive herself for doing so, after the things he had done to her heart. It had felt like he had done things to her heart. Back when the two were together, her heart felt as though it had wings. Not bird wings, but butterfly wings, light and delicate and fluttering. That was her feeling of happiness, of joy, from drinking coffee with him and clutching his hand as they walked down streets, and from finally having found a boy, a man, who was decent, who was kind-hearted and sweet, after she had dated tattoo artists and men with lip and eyelid piercings, grown skateboarders and general men with the aura of being a canard. When she had learned of the cheating, her heart felt totally numb. Not just as though she couldn't feel it beating, but as though there were a big, empty space in her chest, bigger than her chest itself. A void. That was her feeling of shock, of emotional sabotage. From looking through the messages in Dominique's cell phone on one quiet 3 a.m. with him lying in Marianne's own bed and the paranoid curiosity itching at her from friends, mostly boys, speculation at her boyfriend's loyalty to her. A feeling of shock and emotional sabotage from looking through those messages and discovering texts and pictures from a girl, a redhead, died with a nose ring. They were messages sent and received that shattered Dominique's image for Marianne as the decent, kind-hearted, and sweet man. When Marianne brought it up to Dominique in the morning at the coffee house, and they ended their relationship, when he ended their relationship, her heart felt heavy. Not even so much was it heavy with grief. Her heart simply felt like a big, old-fashioned anchor held inside her with iron chains, a burden to carry around. That was her feeling of regret, of heartbroken regret, for being intimate with this man, this boy, and trusting him. From trusting him with her feelings and her body and eventually her love, and trusting his love in return, and thinking him different from all the other men, all the other boys, who had also seemed so rugged and attractive and sweet when she wanted them to seem that way, but who cared nothing for her. Nothing for her mind or for her individual feelings. She thought it was different with Dominique, but he explained in that coffee house 11 months ago that monogamy was not his cup of tea, that he was a man, a free man, with desires ingrained in his DNA, and added in response to her protest that if she could not handle his nature, then perhaps their time together should end, there in the coffee house. And it did. And so did Marianne's hopes in love, in men. In Central Station, Marianne and Dominique walked down the stairs to the platform for Track 9. Marianne saw Dominique's train, an average electric motor train, and not a steam engine. She saw the line's name, Adirondack, and thought of mountains. She thought of the mountains between Montreal and New York. Mountains Dominique would pass through and be gone forever. Not forever, she thought, but still gone. Dominique and his rolling luggage bag stopped, and so did Marianne. He looked at the train, and then she looked at the train, and then he looked at her. He asked her how she felt, and she answered that she did not know. He then asked her if the two of them were all right. Marianne thought about this. Thoughts ran through her mind like paper through an old-fashioned computer or calculator, trying to form out a cohesive answer. A thought ran through her mind. That Dominique in principle was not an evil man, or even a bad man. That he was just a man, a careless, handsome man, and that what he did to her was not extraordinarily monstrous, even though it was still wrong, very wrong, and crushing. But she wondered if she was more crushed than she should have been. She then wondered if she was downplaying Dominique's misdeeds only because he was in fact still handsome behind that stubble she found so grimy and repulsive. She then considered herself weak for allowing herself to think in such a ditzy way, that it was weak of her to allow. Then the paper in her mind's computer was blotted with ink. It thundered in her mind what perhaps had hurt her the most. She thought to herself that what she hated more than Dominique 11 months ago was the feeling of being weak. It thundered in her mind that she could not blame Dominique or herself for trusting him, for loving him, for him playing with her heart and telling her he loved her while he was filling up red-haired lessers on the side. It thundered in her mind that what she could blame herself for was feeling hurt, feeling the victim, feeling weak, and before Dominique when she had been with the canard and the bâtard, She realized that it was so they could make herself feel stronger. And it screamed in her mind that they did not make her stronger, that they only made her... When Marianne was with Dominique, she had found strength, not in his authority or in his beard, but in his trust. Standing on the platform for the Amtrak Adirondack in Central Station, Gare Centrale, Marianne realized that to still feel weak after that was what hurt the most. Dominique asked her again if the two of them were all right. Marianne asked him if he wanted to kiss her before he departed. He asked if she wanted him to. She said that she did not. He looked to the train and sighed nonchalantly. He picked up his bag. Au revoir, he said. Au revoir.